I've known this person for a few years now, actually 2 years to be exact. And I actually had the opportunity to work with him in my former career, reporting into him from a board of directors perspective. You talk about leadership, integrity, honor, truth, commitment, and the ultimate in terms of patriotism. And I'm proud to actually introduce our next speaker, Jim Stavros. As you can see by his background, his pedigree is pretty significant. You can see he's the former commander, Allied commander for NATO. He was the 16th Allied commander for NATO and also ran European Command. So he had responsibilities in his tenure of overseeing operations in Afghanistan, the Balkans, and North Africa, to name just a few. Not just military, but humanitarian. Jim currently is the dean at Tufts University and is responsible for the School of Law and Diplomacy, the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. You can see by his background as well, he is a life learner. He attended the Naval Academy in 1976. We're not necessarily classmates. I graduated in 1988. Jim and I are definitely alumni, so I know that there's some Army folks in here, but I just tell you, I'll just tell you, good luck this year with your football team. It's only been 14 years in a row that you haven't won. So, I'd also like to let you also can see by his background that Jim has a master's degree and a PhD. So again, a lifelong learner, a great patriot, a great friend, a great mentor, and truly a leader for the 21st century. So with that, I'd like to introduce Jim Stavridis. Thank you very much.
Well, good afternoon. So nice to be with you. And Brian, thank you for that very kind introduction. You know, when people kind of hear the biography, Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, etc., you know, they tend to have two reactions. One is, man, I thought you would be taller than you are. And the other one is, you know, Stavridis, if you're really that cool, why were you not a naval aviator? Why didn't you fly jets on and off aircraft carriers? Because I did not. I just drove ships. I was kind of a calmer sort of naval officer. And, you know, I wanted to be a naval aviator, you know, like Goose and Maverick and Top Gun. But in addition to my vertical challenges, I also found that I'd had this very traumatic experience when I was a young boy that made aviation kind of impossible. Well, what I'd like to do today is take about 35 minutes, maybe 40 minutes, and kind of talk about leadership from a global perspective. And I'm going to try and bring in some examples from the experiences that I had as the NATO commander in the military, and also kind of weave into it some of what I've learned in the last 3 years as the dean of the Fletcher School at Tufts University. I understand education, I think, well. I believe in it. And when I saw the opportunity to come and speak to a room full of people who do education, kind of at every level, I jumped at it. So here's what we'll do. We're going to kind of walk around the world and look at some of the challenges globally that I faced as a NATO commander, so we can use that as a context for what do we do about it? What do we do about these global challenges? And what are the leadership lessons that we can draw from that we can all use in our lives and our enterprises as we go along? So I'm going to start with a very challenging day. This, of course, was 9/11. This is the Pentagon on 9/11. And when you look at that image and you see that little red circle, that was my office. So I literally was watching the airplane as it hit the Pentagon. And I'm here talking to you because the pilot's hand broke to the left at the last minute, and he hit the second deck going down. I was up on the fourth deck, so I was spared on that day. And it made me realize that you can feel very safe in your life and in a space. Here I was in the strongest building in the world, right? Behind all these concrete walls, guarded by the most powerful military, in the capital of the richest country on earth. Was I safe behind all those walls? No. And I would argue that's a fundamental thing for leaders to understand, is that your world can change at a moment, and that you can build the biggest walls in the world, and they will not always protect you. In the end, it is bridges, the building of bridges, that create the most security. And I'll try and unpackage that as we go along. So, if we agree that the world is dangerous, let's look at some of those challenges out there, and let's start with a pretty obvious one. This is the Islamic State. This is terrorism 3.0, moving, always adapting. And I'll give you two examples of their capability. One is their ability to advertise, brand, and market. Think about that black flag. 2 years ago, nobody in this room could have picked that flag out of a lineup. Yet today, it's the most downloaded image on the World Wide Web. That's marketing. That's branding. That's proselytizing. It's the heart of their recruiting. And secondly, the dollar sign. We've never seen a terrorist group that's able to raise funds as rapidly and as effectively as the Islamic State. And you couple that with their taste for the barbaric. This is what put the Islamic State on our radar. This is a brave young American journalist, James Foley, who was decapitated in a video by this psychopathic thug, Jihad Johnny. The Islamic State produces scenarios like that consistently. And of course, it's not just the well-known ones like James Foley. This is Kyla Mueller, young, 23-year-old, highly idealistic American student working in refugee camps in Syria. She was apprehended by the Islamic State. She became the sex slave of the leader of the Islamic State, Baghdadi, and she died in captivity there. This is the last letter she wrote home to her mother. The Islamic State has a special penchant for women. If you go online today, you can look at a graph like that one, which is a price list to purchase a human female. And as you can see, the price of a young girl from age 1 to 9 is about $160. For a young girl, woman, from 10 to 20 years old, $120, and so forth. These are young Yazidi girls who were sold into slavery. So this is a group with enormous danger and real reach, and worst of all, they have a plan. This is the caliphate. Look at Spain. I don't think Spain is going to be called Andalus anytime soon, and in fact, we're compressing the Islamic State and its territory. But when a group is this dangerous, this creative, this capable, this venal, and has a plan, we ought to be very concerned about it. And it's not, of course, just the Islamic State. We see these transnational terrorist groups attacking educators with real violence, and not just in Iraq and Syria, where the Islamic State is. These are two horrific attacks you might vaguely remember. The one at the top was in Pakistan, in Peshawar, about a year and a half ago, when the Pakistani Taliban attacked a school and killed 130 children between the ages of 8 and 17. Those photographs at the top are from that attack. And at the bottom, many of you will recognize this courageous young Pakistani girl, Malala, who was awarded the Nobel Prize in 2014 after she was shot because of her advocacy for education, for the education particularly of girls. So these transnational terrorist groups are not only highly dangerous and with global reach, but they are targeting your world in many, many instances. This is another example of a terrorist attack on a university, Garissa University in Kenya. These kind of attacks will continue, and I think they are a fundamental part of the leadership challenges our nations face. And of course, what the Islamic State has produced are these waves of refugees that are moving across the Mediterranean into Europe that have had, I would argue, a significant effect on the decision, I think a poor one, on the part of our British colleagues to come out of the European Union. Additionally, it's put downward pressure on the euro, and so Europe, our most fundamental pool of partners, is under real stress as a result of all of this. Now, if these transnational groups were not enough, we ought to worry about a handful of nations that live somewhat outside the norms of international law, shall we say. This is Iran. Iran, we have concluded, hopefully, a deal with to prevent them from obtaining a nuclear weapon. But unfortunately, as they come off of sanctions and they achieve real new levels of funding, they will continue to be a very dangerous actor in the Middle East. But Iran is not the most dangerous country in the world. It's North Korea. Why? Because North Korea has a young, untested, untried, highly emotional, morbidly obese leader with a really bad haircut. And he's already got nuclear weapons. He has somewhere between 15 and 20 nuclear weapons, and he is increasingly developing the ability to deliver them at range. So we need to worry about, I think, Iran in the near Middle East and North Korea in Asia. We ought to worry about the nation of Syria as distinct from the problems with the Islamic State. In Syria, Bashar al-Assad has killed 300,000 of his own citizens and exported about 7 million of them, about a third of the population, creating a humanitarian disaster in the middle of this very dangerous region. And then finally, we ought to be concerned about Russia. Now, I'm not predicting that we're going to stumble backward into a Cold War. I don't see that happening. We are still in a reasonably capable dialogue with the Russian Federation. But our allies in Europe, notably in Eastern Europe, are very concerned about President Putin and the invasion of Ukraine and Crimea. So there's this basket of nations that form challenges alongside these transnational groups. What else do we need to worry about? What crop is this? Poppies, yes, from which come heroin, which is an ongoing epidemic here in the United States, notably in New England, where Tufts University is located. And I'd like to, for the sake of our conversation this afternoon, kind of park the issue of the moral issue of whether people should use drugs or not. The concern I have about this kind of activity is the profit, the margin from it, which goes to fuel the kind of violent extremism. One of the top sources of income for the Taliban, for the Islamic State, for Al-Qaeda, comes from these narcotics. What else do we have to be concerned about? At the top, Ebola. At the bottom, Zika. Pandemics. In 1918, almost 100 years ago, the Spanish influenza infected 40% of the world's population with a 20% mortality rate. Many biologists and physicians predict a similar pandemic. We, I think, can manage our way through Ebola. Zika, I don't think we really have a handle on yet. Point being, as we think about challenges in this global world, they are not only man-made, but also natural, like this. Now, having said that, as I conclude this kind of list of woe, I will tell you that people would ask me when I was the Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, hey, Admiral, what really keeps you awake at night? What do you worry about the most? Is it Afghanistan, Libya, the Balkans, Syria, piracy? Those are all challenges. We dealt with them all. But the thing that worried me the most was this. It's cyber and cyber security. These are the flags of Ukraine, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Georgia. Small, relatively small democracies in Eastern Europe and the Caucasus. What do they all have in common? All have been attacked in the cybersphere, probably by Russia, creating real disruption to their infrastructure, their records, their financial systems. And it's not just Russia. This is the flag of North Korea. You may remember this film, The Interview. It's a terrible movie. I mean, a really fundamentally bad movie. Not only do I think that, and most of you think that, but the leader of North Korea, the guy with the funny haircut that I showed you earlier, he saw that movie and it mocked him. It made fun of him and the North Korean regime. In response, he launched a cyber attack against Sony Pictures, an American corporation, an attack which caused about $300 million in kinetic damage. So these kind of cyber weapons are increasingly in the hands not only of the United States and Russia and China, but also smaller nations. And I'll give you another example of North Korea's reach. Who is the biggest bank robber in American history? Is it Al Capone? Is it Jesse James? Nope. The biggest bank robbery that occurred in the United States was from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York about a month ago. It was almost $100 million. It was money that was coming out of the Bank of Bangladesh, transferring through the bank in New York to accounts in the Philippines. $100 million bank robbery, nearly. And it was perpetrated by North Korea. So the ability to use this cybersphere not only to attack infrastructure, our electrical grid, but also our finances is very profound. And what's our problem here in the United States? It's gridlock. We have political parties who are constantly battling each other and can't find their way to reasonable compromise. We have agencies of government who do the same. We have branches of government, the executive branch and legislative branch, have great difficulty coming together. And it leads to polarization in our nation and scenes like this. White extremists killing innocent black worshipers. A black veteran, I'm ashamed to say, of the United States, killing police officers in Dallas. We have created a fundamentally polarized society as a result of all of these challenges. And when you boil it all down, back to the Pentagon and my day there, what disturbs me and worries me is the idea that somehow we can protect ourselves by building walls. I would say that is not going to work. And I would say that leaders need to think about leadership and how we exercise leadership to deal with these kind of challenges at every level of our society. So how can we do that? What are some of the tools we can use? I'm going to start by giving you 3 models of leadership. The first one is from the 19th century. 19th century leader. So I'll start with this map. Look at it. Almost everything in it is in pink. There's a few little places that are in white. What do you think the white nations in this map have in common? They are the only countries that were not invaded by Great Britain in the 19th century. Why? Because the 19th century was the age of colonization and conquest. And if you want to think about a 19th century leader, let me introduce you to Otto von Bismarck, the Iron Chancellor of Germany. He was male, dominant, believed in authoritarianism, believed in top-down leadership, believed in colonization. His most famous quote is the following: "The great issues of our time will not be decided by chattering parliaments, but by men of blood and iron." Hence his nickname, the Iron Chancellor. That's 19th century leadership. So what happened in the 20th century? The world turns upside down. Colonization is shattered, fortunately, and new nations emerge all around the world. In the 20th century, our nation goes through 2 wrenching world wars and a Great Depression. Who is a 20th century leader? I'll give you this one. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, one of the iconic American presidents. His style of leadership is worth examining as we think about the difference between 19th century leadership and 20th century leadership. And I'll illustrate it with an anecdote about Roosevelt. He would, in the White House, when people would come to visit, he'd get out a tabletop map of the United States, and he would challenge a visitor and say, draw a line across the United States, anywhere you want, from Washington State to Miami, Florida, or from New York City to San Diego, or from Sacramento, California to Charlottesville, Virginia. Just draw a line. So the visitor would dutifully draw a line across the United States. President Roosevelt would then walk across that line, and he wouldn't say the name of the state. He would walk across that line and name the county and tell you who the head of the Democratic Party chairman was. Now that was 20th century leadership. It was the ability to create a political machine, orchestrate it, put it in place, and use it to move power. And it was not a transparent kind of system. And again, it was a very top-down kind of leadership. 20th century leadership. Well, we're in the 21st century, folks. That's what it looks like. It's a world that moves instantly, that messages move, ideas move, products move in ways no one could have imagined even 100 years ago. So the question for us today is, what's a 21st century leader? Who are they? What do they look like? And what are the tools that they're using? And where are they? I would argue we have political leaders and a way to decide who they will be. But today, leaders look different. In today's world, people exercise leadership in ways that are untraditional and different. Here are some leaders. You'll recognize most of them. I think everyone knows Oprah. Most people can probably get Bill Gates. That's Jack Ma, the head of Alibaba, on the bottom right. Bottom left, anybody know who that is? That's the leader of the largest democracy in the world, which is not the United States of America, it's India. That is Prime Minister Modi of India, who leads a nation which went to the polls and had over 500 million people vote. Our population is about 340 million. And he's a very different kind of leader. Anybody know who that is, center top? That's Lady Gaga, who leads in an artistic, creative kind of way. And who's that on the bottom? Angela Merkel, right. Leader of Germany, a woman of extraordinary principle. I would argue one of the great leaders in our world today. So leaders look different than they did in that 19th century model or even that 20th century model. Which kind of brings us to, what are the tools in today's world? What do those leaders use? What lessons can we draw, and how do we kind of apply them to our own lives and our own endeavors? Well, I give this talk fairly frequently. I very, very, very seldom get to give it to a room full of educators. And I mention that because the first thing I talk about in the toolkit of a leader in the 21st century is education. It's education. And I do not say that to pander to you. I've said this to every organization I've spoken to for years. This is the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University. It's a wonderful brick and mortar school. But as you all appreciate, the world is moving information in vastly different ways. This is a big part of what Blackboard is all about. It's powerful. It's changing the world. And leadership comes from, as Brian said earlier, lifelong education. And I'm finally with an audience that completely agrees with me on that. And I'm not shilling for Coursera here particularly, or edX, or any of the other distributive educational means. But this idea that everything is going to look like this is over. And leadership and learning occur more and more, not only here, but more and more in the mind of the leader. And with that, I'll say lifelong education is not only about what others pour into us, but it is the reading we ourselves do. Now, there are many, many books on leadership, and I'll send Brian the list I'm going to show you today, and I'm not, unfortunately, have enough time to walk through each of these books, but I'll highlight one for you, which is John F. Kennedy's Profiles in Courage, written decades ago about political leaders who took risk and paid an extraordinary price for it. It is a book about the sacrifice of leadership. So my point is not so much these particular books, but the idea of reading as part of all of our leadership skills. And of course, it's not just nonfiction, which are these books. It's also terrific novels. If you want a book about innovation and about the collision of change and tradition, go back and reread A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court by Mark Twain. If you want a book about how to face the wrenching challenges of dynamic change, read Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card, which is about a cyber war in the not too distant future. Point, again, is not these particular books, but the idea of reading both nonfiction and fiction as part of what leaders do and honing our leadership skills through reading. What else are leaders really good at? I would argue the thing I look for most often in a young officer in the military, and that I look for today in a young faculty member, is this. It's innovation. So many people can come, show up, do a good job. That's terrific. But what I really value in a leader is the ability to think about the new. And it can be as small as a Post-it. It can be as big as putting a man on the moon. It can be as crazy an idea as putting airplanes on a ship in the 1920s. Think about the leap of imagination that took 80 years ago. So innovation is crucial for leaders. And in a military context, it tends to be about hardware. These are unmanned systems that are evolving. But I would argue it is not just the hard power in the technology. It's the soft power, the people skills that really make the difference in innovation. Let me give you a practical example. Before I was the commander of NATO, my job was commander of U.S. Southern Command, which is military activity south of the United States. And we wanted to create better security relationships with our partners. But we realized that if you send fully dressed out military troopers with their guns and their camouflage and their Oakley razors down there and their helmets and their military packages, there's an instinctive rejection of that in Latin America. Why? Because the United States has invaded countries in Latin America many times over the decades. So we knew that we had to have a different approach. The innovation here was many of those wonderful nations are baseball crazy, especially the Caribbean and Central America. So can you pick out the soldiers in this photograph? These are Army sergeants who had been exceptional baseball players. We got them involved in putting together clinics about health and resiliency and sports using baseball as a framework. That kind of soft power innovation, I was very proud of my team at U.S. Southern Command. So it's not just the high-tech hard power, it's the soft power side as well. You need both. And I'll give you another example on the blend of hard and soft power. This is Afghanistan. These are Afghan police who are reading books. And you ought to say, you know, that's strange. I thought that Afghans in their 20s and 30s were largely illiterate. You would be correct. That demographic, 20, 30 today in Afghanistan, had education withheld from them by the Taliban. So why are they reading books? The answer is this is a literacy class. We are teaching them to read. We, NATO, we, the United States, we, private-public partnerships. We have trained 800,000 Afghans in reading, which is a powerful bridge to civilization. And yeah, there's guns in that picture. We train them to fight too, because their nation is in a real struggle with the Afghan Taliban. But that balance of not just teaching them to fight, but also education, that is smart power, bringing them together. And it's another example of innovation. You know, in innovation, you're going to have some very good days and a lot of really bad days. It's like baseball. If you're a batter in baseball and you're hitting the ball for a hit 1 in 4, that's a .250 batting average. That's pretty solid. If you're batting 1 in 3, that's a .333 batting average. You're on your way to the All-Star game. If you're batting 4 out of 10 and you're batting .400, you're on your way to the Hall of Fame in Cooperstown. Point being, in innovation, you have to realize you'll have many more misses than you do hits. Leaders have to know that and be prepared to support their team members as they try the new. And you have to recognize it. You have to give real support, real reward, perhaps as simple as the post-it on somebody's computer and as big as that wonderful bonus for innovation at the end of the year. And lastly, on innovation, leaders are those who have to look for the striking change, the so-called black swan, the event that didn't seem possible but has huge consequence. And that can be Ebola, it can be migration, it can be an unexpected turn in an election. All of those things are, if you will, the other side of innovation. Leaders have to be ready for them, just like you have to understand you're not always in a safe place. So that's innovation, one of the fundamental tools, along with lifelong education, that I attribute to truly great leaders. A third is communication. And you know, I often ask people, you know, if you think about communication, what comes to your mind? And what I get the most is, bottom left, is a megaphone. Yeah, that's communication. No, that's not communication. The best image of communication is a bridge, because communication goes both ways. Communication is both listening and transmitting. I'll give you an example from the animal kingdom. This, of course, is a jellyfish. And one of the unique things about a jellyfish is that it is composed almost entirely of nerve cells. It's a sensor. Almost everything on a jellyfish senses the water around it. Why? Because that enables the jellyfish to propel itself in those incredibly graceful gliding motions. Good leaders are like this. They're constantly sensing the sea in which they're swimming. It's a good image to hold in mind. Once you've done that sensing and listening, then it's time to put pen to paper, to write the message, to decide what your ideas are. And then you need to do the really hard part, often, of presenting them. Again, we don't have time to walk through all of these wonderful books, but if you walk out of here remembering one book to look at, to think about presentation, once you have the idea, you have the innovation, look at Stephen Jobs, The Presentation Secrets of Stephen Jobs, an extraordinary book. So that's that package of communication that leaders do effectively, and when you do it well, this is what you get. You get alignment, which is the heart blood of any organization. And then lastly, on communication, I would submit you need to live in this world. What is this? Now you're looking at that thinking, okay, tired admiral, those are probably sea lanes of communication. Nope. Maybe they are airline routes around the world. Nope. Maybe they're fiber optic cables connecting the internet. Nope. This is the world according to Facebook. The brighter the white, the higher the concentration of Facebook users. There are 1.65 billion people on Facebook. Bigger than China, bigger than India. Within a decade, Facebook will probably be larger than China and India combined. These social networks, and of course it's not just Facebook, it's Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, etc., etc. This is where communication is moving. This is a powerful bridge connecting enormous groups of people. And we need to be in this world. Because the bad news is, I'm also showing you a picture of the command and control system of the Islamic State. They are using these social networks to recruit, to proselytize, to conduct operations. We need to be here. Good leaders need to be here. And our messages need to populate this. Our messages are pretty good, I think. Democracy, liberty, freedom of speech, freedom of education, freedom of assembly, gender equality, racial equality. We execute them imperfectly. But they are the right values. The long throw of history is on the side of those values, and we need to move them in these networks. So, innovation, communication, and the third practical skill I'll leave you with is this, which is collaboration. And sometimes I'll say to an audience, okay, tell me, what's an image of teamwork, of collaboration? And almost invariably what I get is 8 guys rowing. You know, the rowing shell. Rowing, rowing, rowing. Nope. That's a certain form of teamwork, but real teamwork, real collaboration looks more like this. These young ladies are in a peloton, a bicycle race, a high-speed bicycle race, and they are cooperating. Some of them are teammates, some of them are competing, they're drafting on each other, it's fluid, it's moving back and forth. It is not eight guys rowing stroke after stroke after stroke. Real collaboration is like this. It's creative and it moves. And collaboration in the global sense can happen in organizations like NATO with its crossing of cultures and language and ideas. It can happen in coalitions. This is the coalition against the Islamic State. The trick in all of these kind of organizations, be it as simple as a peloton, as structured as NATO, or a pickup team like a coalition, the key is respect for each other's culture, a shared sense of objective, and the ability to move at speed. If you do those things, you can apply real teamwork. And I'll give you a practical example. This is a hospital ship, big U.S. Navy vessel, huge. And it's manned not strictly by U.S. sailors who drive it around. It is teamwork, it's collaboration. It's full of Doctors Without Borders and Operation Smile and all of these wonderful NGOs that create healing around the world. It's full of medical personnel from our government as well as from allied governments. It's a huge exercise in teamwork and collaboration leading to hundreds of thousands of patient treatments around the world. So we've talked about lifelong learning. We've talked about communication, innovation, and collaboration. I want to close, and then we'll open it up for some comments, with perhaps the most important thing of all, and that is integrity, character. I've mentioned a couple of books today. One I truly recommend is David Brooks's latest, The Road to Character. And in it, David talks about the difference between our resume values. Stavridis was the Supreme Allied Commander. He has a PhD. He was the commander of Southern Command. He was an admiral in the Navy. He's the dean of the fleet. You know, the resume values, and he contrasts them with what he calls our eulogy values. What are people going to say at your funeral? Because here's a news flash, they're not going to read your resume at your funeral, right? Hopefully they're going to say Jim Stavridis was a great friend. He was a mentor. He was a terrific dad. He was a great son. And they'll tell stories like that. Finding that balance between your resume values, which matter, obviously, but also your eulogy values, that is, according to David, the road to character. I think it's a pretty good road to be on. And I'd say fundamental to it are our values, which we've talked about: freedom, democracy, liberty, all of that. They come from many places, but largely from the ancient civilizations, the Greeks, the Romans, that's Cicero in the middle, through the Enlightenment in Europe, that's Voltaire, through our founding fathers, that's George Washington, his book, Rules of Civility, I commend to you. It ought to be required reading in our nation's capital. Down to exceptional leaders today, global leaders like Angela Merkel. Those values matter deeply. And let me give you a practical example from my life about understanding that. This is a photograph. I have a big copy of it, and a friend of mine gave it to me over a decade ago and said, look at this great photo, Admiral. You're going to love this picture. It's a U.S. Navy crew in front of its ship in World War II. I looked at it, I admired it, and then I started to look closely at it, and there's something really odd about this photograph, and I'd ask you to take a hard look at it. You see that first row of, those are the officers on the ship. It's very even. The second row of men in this photograph, if you look carefully at it, you'll see that 3 are missing. Those are the chief petty officers. You see that gap in the second row? 3 missing chief petty officers. So I looked at the photo and I thought, that is so strange. This is a military organization. You would never set up a formation that has like a gap in the middle of it. It's unmilitary. It's not uniform. So I started looking closely to say, why? And eventually I found the 3 missing chief petty officers. They're 3 African Americans, and they're standing at the back of the formation. You can pick them out, and I can tell they're the chiefs by their uniform, which you can find if you examine it closely. They had been moved, obviously, to the back of the formation. Photograph taken in 1949. Now, I don't know what happened when this photo was taken, but I'll give you a guess, and I think it's a good guess. Generally, when you set up a photo like this, the second in command of the ship organizes it and gets everybody lined up, everybody's in their place, okay, we've got a photographer, everybody's in their ranks. Then the captain comes down and takes his place, and the captain is the guy in the middle of the front row. You can tell because he has scrambled eggs on his hat there. My guess, I don't know this, my guess is the captain came down, looked at the formation, saw the 3 African American petty officers, chief petty officers, and said, you 3, go to the back. Stand with your enlisted division back there. 1949. I show it to you because as leaders, I think there's 2 messages from this. One is, look closely at things. Look closely. When someone says, this is fabulous, and then you just pop it on the wall, take a good hard look at everything that comes across your desk. And the second lesson, more obviously, I suppose, we all ought to ask ourselves, what are we doing today that in 50 years is going to look really, really odd, wrong? That's integrity. We're not always going to make the perfect decision, but the more we look, the more we examine, the more we spend time thinking about character and values, I think the more we have a chance to make the right decisions. There's another aspect to this as well, which is your personal accountability. And here is a cautionary tale. I would guess many of you would recognize Jennifer Lawrence, beautiful young Academy Award-winning actress. You saw her in The Hunger Games, among many other terrific films. She took some, shall we say, intimate photographs of herself, intended for her significant other, 2 consenting adults, no problem. Unfortunately, she posted them into an account in the cloud, which was hacked. And all those photos were widely distributed on the web, as is the nature of our world today. I mentioned that terrible story. I can't imagine that kind of experience for anybody. I mentioned in the context of there is no protecting wall around anything. And every action you take has real consequence of being revealed. And I'd merely ask you to consider, what does that supercomputer that you're carrying around in your pocket reveal about you? Character is what we do when we think nobody is looking, but someone's always looking. That's the cautionary tale, I think, for leaders today. be careful in what is distributed. So last thing, and then we'll open it up. Let me give you a little homework assignment. It's a class of educators, and you can do it or not. It's one of those kind of homework assignments. But here's my challenge for you. Ask yourself the question, who are my heroes? Have you ever done that? Name 5 or 6 people you really admire. Could be your Uncle Fred, could be Franklin Delano Roosevelt, could be Rosa Parks. Ask yourself, who are your heroes? These are my heroes. You can't have them. They're mine. But sometime tonight, or maybe when you get home from this wonderful conference, sit down with a piece of paper and write down 5 or 6 people you really admire. And then, on the next column over, why? What do you admire about each of them? For me, this is Juan Manuel Santos, upper left. He's the president of Colombia, who's bringing a peace agreement to his nation. Condoleezza Rice, first African-American woman to be the Secretary of State of the United States. George Marshall, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State of the United States. Calm, measured temperament. Simón Bolívar, liberator of South America, a man of real courage. In the middle is my dad, a retired Marine colonel. That's a photograph taken from his service in Vietnam. The far right is Michelle Kwan, one of the great athletes our nation has produced, a figure skater, more determined than anybody I know. She's also a graduate of the Fletcher School, as is Juan Manuel Santos, by the way. Cheap advertisement there. So when you put down your list of great people, put down the qualities that you really admire, and then here's the hard part in the homework. Ask yourself, how am I doing? Am I as innovative as Juan Manuel Santos? Am I as focused as Condi Rice? Am I as much of a gentleman as George Marshall? Do I have the courage of Simón Bolívar? Am I as good a father as my father was? Am I as devoted to my passion as Michelle Kwan? You should ask yourself those questions. Doing so is a pretty good step on the road to character. So I'll close. Leadership is hard. It is a bit like rolling the boulder in Greek American. I'm allowed to use Sisyphus and other Greek mythology, but it will roll back down on you. Leaders fail. You have to recognize that. The measure of any leader is not whether or not you ever fail. It's what you do when the boulder does roll down inevitably. And it's always a question of speed. How fast do you want to make change? How fast do you move as a leader? And so I'll wrap up with the cheetah here. The cheetah is a pretty remarkable animal. It's the fastest thing on earth. It can go from 0 to 60 in under 3 seconds. And look at it. It is optimized for speed. Has a little narrow head like an axe. Has powerful front legs, huge lungs to process all that oxygen. These massive back legs to really drive it. Wait a minute. What is that tail all about? Think about it. If you are creating a cheetah, or evolution is creating a cheetah, take your pick, why would it have a huge tail? That tail looks like the size of one of its legs. Why doesn't it have like a little bunny tail? No drag. It goes faster, right? Why is it? What's the answer? It is for stability. If a cheetah didn't have a big tail to kind of counterweight itself, when it tried to turn, moving at speed, it would just go tumbling into the jungle undergrowth. Speed is about optimized moving, but never forget you have to maintain stability as well. Last picture. This is a photograph from 3 years ago. These are Somalis on a beach. They're migrants trying to get across the Horn of Africa. And they're raising their cell phones, looking for a signal. We've all been there, right? That doesn't, here's another news flash, that doesn't help moving in there. But what is this really a picture of? It's a picture of hope. It's a picture of hope for a better place, a better life, for a connection to a modern world. It's really an extraordinary photograph. And as I close, I'll leave you with a quote from Napoleon. And I like Napoleon because short people need to stick together. Napoleon, who was an extraordinary leader, said that a leader is a dealer in hope. A leader is a dealer in hope. Not a dealer in fear, a dealer in hope. I think that's a pretty powerful line for us to consider as we think about leadership in this very turbulent 21st century. Thank you very much. Pleasure to be with fellow educators. Time for a couple of questions, kind of 5 minutes. Can I offer the floor to anybody who has a question? Sir.
Hi, I'm Lawrence Coleman with Blackboard, and first of all, I want to thank you for your service.
Thank you.
One of the questions I wanted to ask you was, what is one of the one characteristics that you believe every leader should possess? And the follow-up to that question is, what is most important to an organization? Is it the mission? Is it core values? Or is it the vision?
Yeah. I think we could talk about a lot of different qualities, and I hope I've illuminated a broad group of them today. I think the greatest quality any leader has to have is integrity. It is to be a truth teller, to be honest, and I count in integrity the ability to be kind to others, to interact with others in a way that respects them. I think all of that is integrity and character. I think that's the most fundamental, and the mental map I have is that's kind of the base that a leader stands on. All the other things I've talked about here today, I think, are part of the toolkit of leaders, but that, for me, would be the fundamental one. In terms of this age-old question of mission versus people versus values, etc., it's all of them. That, in the end, is the essence of leadership. It's often said that politics is the distribution of resources. I think that's correct. Leadership is the distribution of that balance between mission, people, and value. It is so often the case that when a leader puts one or the other at the supreme top, be it mission or people as it's normally categorized, that's when organizations fall off the rails. Another way to put it, I'll close with this, is so often people want to say leadership is like an on and off switch. You know, it's like either you're going to really get the mission done or you're going to be one of those leaders who just takes care of the people all the time. It's not an on and off switch, it's a rheostat. You got to kind of dial it in between those two. Thanks, that's a great question. Others? Got one right there. Yes, sir.
I want to talk, I guess, our current political climate and where we're being seen around the world when you talk about those bridges.
Right.
And you've seen over the course of your roles that you've taken on with different organizations and how countries look at us. And we are kind of the spotlight to how democracy should be run.
Sure.
But it seems like other countries are maybe gaining on that or improving upon that, and how willing do you see us not able to talk across the aisle and adopt what other countries are doing, that we might be so, we have the blinders on, because we're the caretakers of democracy.
Yeah.
You mentioned India, so I think just your thoughts on that.
I'm happy to give you a couple thoughts on that. In today's political conversation, it's often about the left and the right, and Democrats and Republicans, and liberals and conservatives. That's how we tend to think of this spectrum. I would argue in the 21st century, it's more about a spectrum that goes from those who would take us down a path of isolationism, would build walls around our nation, would erect tariff barriers. I think in the end those are going to be a set of choices, but I don't think they're the right ones. The countervailing view is an open economy, globalization, moving toward the future, interacting with other nations and building bridges. It's a set of choices. And you can have a legitimate intellectual calm dialogue about which way we ought to go as a nation. Because you can make an argument for the United States, because we're so big, that, hey, we can grow it here, we can invent it here, we can sell it here, we can build a big wall to the south, maybe build a wall to the north, I don't know, we got oceans on both sides. It is a intellectually discussable proposition. But I think all of the evidence, and I've spent my life looking at the world and looking at security and looking at international economics, I think a better course for us is one that advocates building bridges, connecting with the world, having a sensibly open economy. That doesn't mean we have foolish trade deals, but intelligently constructed ones that create larger markets. I think that's the right outcome for us. And my best evidence for that is that we already tried this. We tried this after World War I. We came back to the United States. We rejected membership in the League of Nations. We built enormous trade barriers, the Hawley-Smoot tariffs. How'd that turn out? Well, we had a Great Depression and got into the Second World War. 80 million people died. I think we've tried that. We're going to be better over here. It's going to be complicated. It's going to be messy. We're going to be frustrated. We've got to be smart about it. But I think that's the debate. It's not so much about left and right. It's really about closed versus open. I would advocate strongly for the latter. I think we got time for one more. I bet this is the next group of people that really want to get up here and give a great presentation. So let me conclude, because this gentleman was very kind to say, thank you for your service. I appreciate that. People say that to me a lot. I spent 37 years in the military. But I want to make a very important point with you. There are lots of ways to serve this country. Our police service, our firemen service, our nurses and doctors service, many in very low-income ways. Our teachers serve us. My sister is an elementary school teacher in Charleston, South Carolina. I look at her salary, the work she does, the heart she puts into it. My wife was a preschool teacher. Our teachers serve us magnificently. Our education system has its challenges, which you know very well, but taken full spectrum, K to PhD, we got a pretty good hand of cards here. And it is the hope of our future. So I appreciate when people say thank you for your service. I want to close today to a room full of educators by saying thank you for your service to this nation. Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.